Hello, folks. Just have to share my screen for a second. And then get started. Sorry about that. Okay. So the presentation this evening is entitled Creating Songs in AI, the Constraining Effects of Strativation. So we're going to come across these fairly clunky terms very shortly. Hopefully I can explain what it is that I mean by them and see whether we can apply them or not. But firstly, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm on today, the Pambalong clan of the Awabakal people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'm sure that you are on similar land wherever you might be, whether that's virtual or not. The other acknowledgement I want to make is to Joe Velikovsky, who has been the co-author with me on this particular paper, which came out just a few weeks ago. But he kindly sat down with me for half a day and we went through ChatGPT extensively, actually, and he showed me how to use prompts to get exactly as what that you're after. Anyway, that will come up a little bit later, but thanks to Joe for that help. I'm rushing a little bit because there's a lot to get through. At the inaugural Songwriting Studies Research Network, which was held in Birmingham, UK in 2019, I was invited by Simon Barber to give the inaugural keynote paper, which I entitled Songwriting Practice and Production, the Past, Present and Future, which I thought was rather an ambitious title, as it turned out. But in terms of the latter aspect, the future, I observed that the possibility of a piece of automation being able to create a convincing song using plausible titles, familiar structures, interesting lyrics, rhyme schemes and catchy melodies in one adaptable and learning software application is not too far away. Given that it's now 2024, a lot has happened since, as we'll discover. As many of you will know from my work in creativity and music production, songwriting, and so on, the creative industries, that I've been exploring the notion of creativity for some time. I'm not going to go through that in any great detail, but I just want to set out the questions initially that my abstract set out for you as well. In other words, the first question that I put forward was, can we ascribe agency to technology? Which is a broad question. And from that sprang the idea, for me at least, that does this allow us to recognise the complementary effect of the concurrent use of tradition and innovation, which has been labelled elsewhere tradivation, and the constraining and enabling or constrabling process this presents to the system of songwriting. Hopefully this will make sense as we go along. So just a quick note about creativity is that scientific studies of creativity fail to support our most cherished beliefs. And that includes fairly romantic and inspirationist ones that people in the West are particularly fond of. But Beth Hennessy and Teresa Amabile in 2010 did a meta-analysis of what had been done so far in the research literature, and they concluded in part that most researchers now agree that creativity involves the development of a novel product, idea, or problem solution that is of value to the individual and or the larger social group. And we can divest that down into two words, novelty and value. That's been argued over in the literature since the 1940s, and there is now, as Hennessy and Amabile have attested, general agreement about what we mean by that word. And certainly that's what I mean when I use it. In the history of that research literature, according to Beth Hennessy, again in 2017 with another meta-analysis, so that researchers and theorists were doing all that they could to break down questions of creativity into the absolute smallest components they could control and measure. Was it in the brain? Was it in personality? Was it in the cognition? Was it in socio-cultural aspects or whatever? An exploration of the most recent literature reveals that this situation may in fact be changing. A growing number of publications are now reflecting a systems perspective. And as many of you who are familiar with my work will know, I've been working with this model, the systems model of creativity, originally developed by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I've been working with it since 1994, which is quite some time, really. And in that time, it has been reconceptualized, adapted, changed slightly, etc. The core of it has remained functionally the same. But this one is the latest iteration of that from my perspective. And that came out in the paper that's to be published from that Songwriting Studies Research Network in the Songwriting Studies Journal. And I have a preprint on Google Scholar and Academia and ResearchGate that's been peer-reviewed, edited, and is ready for press. And in it, we can see that agency is an important part of what's going on, and certainly the system needs an agent. That's where we've tended to concentrate in terms of our understanding. But there's also a knowledge system that's just as operative and effective as an agent, and there's also a field as well, which is constituted by all of those members of that social organisation that understand the knowledge system to a greater or a lesser degree, some less so, some more so. I'm not going to go into that in any great detail, but you can read a lot of my papers on that, some of which are listed in the reference list in this PowerPoint. I just want to say that there are characteristics of systems that you probably need to get used to if you're going to have a look at culture as a system, or biology as a system, or virtually anything as a system. And I want to concentrate on the last aspect of these. But nonetheless, you need to understand complexity. You need to understand non-linearity, certainly of cause and effect. Emergence, it's not the same thing as a machine operating where something leads to something else, something leads to something else, and then an event happens. But something that is not inherent in the system becomes, literally becomes or emerges from the operation of that system. And of course, interconnectedness, all parts are interconnected, and that interconnectedness is demonstrated in the scalability of systems, that is systems within systems within systems within systems that operate vertically but also horizontally. Once again, go to the literature if you want to understand what I'm talking about there. But it's this one, complementarity, that's increasingly important in our understanding of systems. It just simply means that those things that we talked about prior to these ideas, we generally talked about in either or ways. It's either structure or it's agency. It's either the environment or it's culture. But from a systems perspective, both of these things are important. So we stop thinking in either or terms and start thinking in both and terms. So it's both agency and structure. So just to illustrate that point a little bit, you can see here a number of what we tended to have put into bipolar oppositions, that maybe the creative process was heuristic or it was algorithmic. In a complementarity framework, it is probably both. Practice and theory, we can see in the nature of praxis, I should say. Free will and determinism, for my mind, is linked heavily to agency and structure. And Anthony Giddens' concept of structuration is to try and put both and together. Same with enabling and constraining. Harry Kritikos's work is important here. And as we'll discover, the same with innovation and tradition in terms of that ugly term, tradivation. So what does that mean? Just to use the little serif sign, which is on the top left-hand side of your keyboard, as a way, actually it's Kelso and Engstrom's idea, this, as a way of saying that tradition and innovation are not oppositional, they are complementary, hence the term tradivation. It's a common misconception, certainly from Negus and Pickering's point of view, to regard innovation and tradition as diametrically opposed to each other. Creativity doesn't emerge out of a vacuum, but builds on one or more existing cultural traditions. And tradivation is just simply the merging of tradition with modern innovation, recognising that tradition is an accumulation of past innovations. As these innovations are unsettling prior work, they themselves become traditional in a sense, even with the way that new paradigms develop, etc. But there is a tradition or a body of knowledge, to put it another way, that develops that the new innovations come out of. Hence the concept tradivation. Constraining is much the same. When we come across a set of structures, we tend to think that they are deterministic and they want to shut down innovation, etc. But what we're increasingly finding is that those structures are absolutely vital to creativity. And in fact, agency itself is absolutely dependent on structure. And certainly that's Anthony Giddens' particular point of view. But Harry Kritikos, in his 2021 paper on internet radio, had this to say. He said, the structures in which practice take place, the habitus that assists practice, the agency that affects the way we practice, and the various forms of capital that help us engage in practice, so you can detect there a slight Bourdieusian tack to what he's doing, do not in fact constrain us at one point and enable us at another. Rather, we as practitioners are constrained and enabled by these structures, and this is the important point, at exactly the same point in time. In other words, we are constrained by these structures. And I think that's a really important point to understand as far as systems go. And that gets us, of course, to structuration, which is another ugly word that was invented in this case by Anthony Giddens, that great sociologist. He'd written a number of really good books. One of course, is the central problems in social theory. So structuration, from his point of view, is the merging of agency, that is, the ability to make choices. Now, that's critically important when we come to look at songwriting and AI, with the supposedly deterministic structures which predispose action. Note, not determine, but predispose. The ability to make creative choices, that is, have creative agency, depends on having social and cultural structures in place. Now, I'm not going to go too deeply in that, but I wrote a paper on the generation of power in the recording studio, published in 2008. You can access my argument there. Which moves us a little closer to the question of technology and systems themselves. This little book, The Nature of Technology by Brian Arthur, What It Is and How It Evolves, is very close to what Csikszentmihalyi's thinking was about creativity and systems. In fact, they're using similar terms. Well, sorry, both of them are using similar terms, and I wanted to put them in touch with each other. But unfortunately, Csikszentmihalyi recently passed away, so that opportunity slipped by me. But Brian Arthur argues in his influential book, The Nature of Technology, What It Is and How It Evolves, that the representative technology is no longer a machine with fixed architecture carrying out a fixed function. It is a system, a network of functionalities, a metabolism of things executing things that can sense its environment and reconfigure its actions to execute appropriately. I think that's an important point for us to remember in terms of AI, the technological basis or structure of what AI is doing. So AI, what is artificial intelligence? Once again, I'm going to skirt across this quite quickly. All technologies where machines are taught or trained to act, perform like human brains, fall under AI. And there are some types, or there's a typology, certainly developed by people like David Schreier. Pretty sure it's David, or it could be Robert. But anyway, the reference is at the end. Firstly, expert systems. These are generally chatbots or something similar. The machine follows a big set of rules that deterministically drives its action. If a certain circumstance is presented, take one action. If another circumstance is presented, take another, and so on. If A, then B is the fundamental programming concept of expert systems. You know, if you're talking to Siri or Alexa or whatever, then you're talking to an expert system, and you can see it the way it develops in terms of a process outlined there in that diagram. We then move on to machine learning, which is a slightly different one. These are algorithms and models that are trained on available data to predict, classify, and cluster them. All of these come under ML or machine learning. So machine learning models are never explicitly programmed, rather they learn from patterns of data themselves. And billions of data points are fed into a system that identifies similarities among sections of data, so it's looking for patterns. And the machine learning system begins to get better at predicting where the next piece of data should go. And you can see the process outlined there. Now, deep learning is a step on. It's a subset of machine learning, but based on numbers of artificial, multi-layered neural networks of transistors, all tied together and mimicking brain functionality. And this is the one that is creating all of the angst and certainly all of the positive hope from the technologists and business people from Silicon Valley. But essentially, the more data you feed into this deep learning system, the better it gets, learning exponentially. You know, real-time language translation is a particular example there. We get into ChatGPT, of course. So deep learning algorithms are capable of learning from unlabeled or unstructured data, whereas machine learning models generally learn to process structured data. Now, that's important for the question of, say, images and certainly of audio. It's an evolution of machine learning. They're both algorithms, of course. But the key difference is how they process and learn from it. While basic machine learning models do become progressively better at performing as they take in new data, they still need some human intervention. Deep learning, it's thought, was actually has moved beyond that point. It's an algorithm that can determine whether or not a prediction is accurate through its own neural network. Minimal to no human help is required. And that's the point that I believe that we may shortly get to with songwriting generators. So generative AI refers to deep learning models that can generate high quality text, images, and other content based on the data they're trained on. Chat GPT is what we're looking at here, and that's the one that's caused all the kerfuffle so far. So generative models encode a simplified representation of their training data and draw from it to create a new work that's similar but not identical to the original data. And that phrase there, a new work that's similar but not identical to the original data, goes back to our definition of creativity in terms of how we define novelty. Not totally original, because I believe that, and many others certainly inside the literature I'm dealing with, believe that that's an impossibility. As has been argued, as I demonstrated with tradition and innovation, everything comes from somewhere else. And the novelty is to the point where we simply don't recognise it immediately. I have a few stories about that, but nonetheless, we'll move on quite quickly from here. So my research, in this case, the methodology I use is practitioner-based inquiry. That's a method which encompasses self-reflective examination of the practitioner's own activity through a process of participation in that activity. I've used this method a few times. It allows the insider perspective. So in other words, the point of view from the creator, rather than, say, an ethnographer being part of the community where this is happening and attempting to both be inside and outside, or it's very, very different to a quantitative approach, which tries to remain outside and objective. And of course, all of those techniques add to the stock of research knowledge, or the domain of the literature on songwriting and AI in this case. So I had presented a paper using PBE before, and I'll just quickly skirt through this as well. Here we have an agent making choices, which happens to be myself. Here's my songbook, which is probably riddled with songs like this, which you can actually just see from the patterns on it, the editing process. It doesn't fall fully formed from a person's head. And I wrote about this in some depth in, well, I say we, as in Paul Thompson and myself, wrote about this in some depth in our book on Paul McCartney and the chapter on yesterday. Each agent, as I said before, must be related in some ways to the domain. That's the knowledge. In other words, you acquire the knowledge of being a songwriter from all sorts of places. In my case, I interacted with songs initially in sheet music form, with sing-alongs around the family piano. I encountered people like Irving Berlin, Hoagie Carmichael. My mother certainly played these on the 78 RPM shellac discs that she had, played on the family Victrola. I listened to the radio, top 40 hits, and along came the Beatles in the early 60s. My own LP collection, part of which I still have, and some of my children have now. Certainly CDs and MP3s and on we go in terms of technological change. But nonetheless, there's a body of songs that I've been drawing on. And of course, I've been deeply immersed in the field of songwriting through my connections in and operating within the music industry, some of which you can see there. So I won't dwell there too long. But this is the song that came out of that particular process and is written about in that particular paper on PBE and songwriting practice. Basically, it's the lead sheet. That's important to me. Why is that the case? Because if we get down to the nub of songs, at this point, even though I've written about this earlier in terms of defining songs, this is the core for me, which is the lyric, the melody, and a very basic structure. This one, if you look at the pattern of it, is a ternary form. So there we have it, the system in operation very, very quickly. The agent, the domain, and the field resulting in a particular song. So can we do this with AI? Can we apply that model to AI? That's the basic question here, because if we can, then we can generate an answer around the question of agency. So what did I do? In searching through what are the current song generators, I thought I'm on ChatGPT asking it to write some lyrics for me. Why don't I ask it to tell me what's out there in terms of song generators? So I did, and this is a rough paraphrase of what it said. It indicated that MuseNet and Duke Deck can generate music and some lyric content, while Amper Music generates music but offers some tools for creating melodic ideas. Note that they're talking here about music, and then they slip into lyric, and then melody, and then music. Music generally means, in this context, the whole orchestration, arrangement, instrumentation, etc. Um, it needs to be supplemented, in other words, the music, with additional tools or manual input to generate lyrics as well. And this is where the problem comes, trying to get these two things to operate together. Ava is focused on creating music but may require external tools or human collaboration for lyric generation. Watson Beat also helps create music but would need to be integrated with other tools for lyric generation. Endless is a tool for collaborative music creation and can generate melodies, but for lyrics, you will need to use separate tools or write them manually. Quite often that points to the use of ChatGPT. I wonder whether ChatGPT as an algorithm is instituting its own particular place in this. Because the last claim from that piece of AI is we still appear to be at the stage of combining different tools, one for lyrics and one for melody. But ChatGPT may not be as all-knowing as it appears. Searching YouTube at exactly the same time as I asked ChatGPT the question gets you to clips about programs like VoiceMod, Songwriting, Beatbot, and Sooner. I'm going to come back to Beatbot in a sec. While VoiceMod and Songwriting are close to being standalone programs, they're somewhat clunky and appear to be close to expert systems rather than deep learning. I could be wrong about that, as I haven't reversed engineered them, but nonetheless, that's how they feel to me. However, Beatbot, I think this is of a different order again. The AI-powered songmaker, and I'm quoting here from basically a press release, creates original short songs based on text prompts using Splash's proprietary AI for vocals and music and GPT for lyric. So once again, there's an amalgam of different programs, if you like, or different tools to make the one output. Unlike other models, however, Beatbot is IP safe and trained on data collected and owned by Splash, as well as data freely available under the Creative Commons license. So ethically, it appears to be okay and may not be involved in all of those copyright issues that are currently being instigated in the courts. It's made by Australian generative AI company Splash, and their CEO, Phillips, who wrote the press release, says that the tool uses a combination of machine learning techniques to accurately and melodically compose vocals from the lyrics generated by GPT. So there it is. It's that combination. Not a standalone as yet, but it's a combination. It also allows users to input parameters for specific genres and vocals. And it doesn't do a bad job, but you can still, through that process of what's called the uncanny valley, detect that this, in fact, is an AI-generated song. This makes Beatbot a versatile tool that can be used to create anything from catchy pop tunes to hardcore rock songs. And it sounds reasonably convincing, but as I said, invoking the uncanny valley to a point. So I'm going to come to some ideas here, and then I'm going to present to you very, very quickly the way that I attempted to put a song together. It's noteworthy the choices being created by the human interlocutor, person involved in operating Beatbot, in this case, using Beatbot, are still being made within the parameters of what Beatbot supplies, similar in some senses to the original drum machines from the 80s, but a little bit more advanced in terms of the deep learning process. With this constraining process in place, in other words, Beatbot both enables and constrains at the same time, the complementarity of structuration, which is agency structure, intertwined together in a complementary way, is therefore the order of the day as far as agency is concerned, either of humans or machines. I'm not ruling out agency of the machine as yet. So here's my, I was just about to say a paltry effort, but it was a big effort on my part at the time, using a fairly fundamental piece of AI, some of you will identify as GarageBand. Certainly the AI DistroKid and what's been applied in iTunes and Spotify and Pandora and elsewhere to get these particular songs up online, therefore to an audience and so on. And myself operating both GarageBand and ChatGPT. And the 4 songs, the EP that I produced, are available on YouTube. You just search Tree in the Machine, which is the project title. You'll get to it as well. A number of things have fallen out of this project too, by the way, as in happened as a result of this project. To explain it, I've gone to someone else's YouTube site just to give you some idea of what's involved, and I would suggest that there are a number of workarounds in trying to get these two things to actually correlate and to get the single song out of it. So ChatGPT can encode what's going on and moving that into Google Colab. That's then writing music with ChatGPT. It's then goes back through Colab again. It's MIDIable, and at that point you can pull the MIDI files into GarageBand and so on. And of course, the lyrics are generated by ChatGPT itself. One of the, well, actually the final song I wrote on that EP, mainly because it became very structural in the final performance of those songs, is a song called The Mesmerizing Order of Things. And I asked ChatGPT a number of questions, and we eventually resulted in precisely what I wanted, which was something structured in a ternary form, with the title appearing in section 1, section 2, or verse A, verse 2, but not appearing in the middle 8, or what we could call the middle 8. It initially threw up a verse, pre-chorus, chorus structure, and I thought was some fairly good lyrics, actually. And then I asked it for an AABA form, and then it hit on verse, chorus form for me. So structurally, it was thinking through what was going on, if we can call it thinking through. But following the prompts, and as I said, I had a half a dozen before we got to it. And here's the response from ChatGPT to my last series of prompts. It said, certainly, here's a revision of the mesmerizing order of things with 2 4-line A section, a contrasting B section. The title is included in the 4th line of each A section. And I won't read the lyrics for you. You've probably browsed through them for yourself then. And, you know, if I'd written these lyrics, I would be happy enough to put these to a melody that I generated myself. But nonetheless, I use a melody generated out of my interaction with GarageBand. In other words, I played the instrument, played the melody into GarageBand, which then gave me instrumentation and arrangement. So we've got lyric and music, but we haven't generated lyric and melody properly as yet, as far as I'm concerned. So how do we put that inside the model? Well, there's a lot of domain immersion going on here, both on my part, but certainly on, let's call them the machines for now, or the algorithms part. Scraping, in this case, a selection of 100 million songs from Apple Music, whatever that can be found on iTunes, whatever can be found online, etc., will give the machine access to a knowledge system, a domain of knowledge, etc., in the same way as I had gained access through a fairly long and laborious process of both listening and learning songs. In terms of field immersion, very, very similar thing occurring here. You know, it has to interact, what has resulted has to interact with another form of AI in terms of DistroKid, interacts with another form of AI, interacts with another form of AI, and at that point we come back to human listeners, which may be connoisseurs of songs, which may be just amateurs. I noticed that Beatbot's data is predominantly, in terms of the numbers of people and where the people are using, is India initially. I think second on the ranking of how many people are using Beatbot is from the US. And then I think Russia, which is an interesting one in terms of what's occurring. I'll have to investigate that as well. So in terms of the field in AI, the intermediaries in the field play a critical role in evaluating creative works. But after they've made their choices, there is a test on DistroKid for copyright material, by the way. The ultimate test for a creative work is whether or not it's accepted by a broad audience. So we can see that the AI is being entwined inside this system as well. And there it is. There's the EP that's up on YouTube. First song I did was Chindia Effect. Then the next one was Doorway to the Edge of the Emergent. You can see what I'm trying to do there. Fade up to the star-strewn sky. And then finally the mesmerizing order of things, which became, as I said, very structural in terms of the result. Very improvisational on the first tune. It's just me and the machine working things out together. I then actually had an exhibition where I pulled in a fairly good musician who actually played to all of these as well. But that's for another paper. So there's the resulting lyrics, which has to be put together with the other melodic content as well. And we could, in many ways, apply the agent here to the machine itself, or to the human, or a combination of the two. And in fact, these are the conclusions that I would come to. This is from a prior conclusion. I think that paper I mentioned before from 2008. Which is the human working by themselves. In taking the knowledge system and rearranging aspects of it to create novel and valued cultural products, which is the innovation, songwriters make choices. They act as agents in this process whose essential task is to produce some variation in the field's inherited information or domain, that is its traditions, In producing these variations in the symbol system, the innovation, they make decisions and choices about them, and that's agency, as far as I'm concerned, and certainly quite a number of sociologists as well. The limitations on autonomous decision-making are, however, set by the field and domain, acting as both a set of constraints and enabling factors, that is, constrablers, and I've inserted this into this quote, by the way, making creative choices possible, hence the square brackets. Now, a tentative conclusion for this one would be, for this particular piece of research, in scraping the data of the knowledge system and rearranging aspects of it to create novel and valued cultural products, artificial intelligence in the form of generative AI makes self-guided choices. This form of AI acts as an agent in this process, and its essential task is to produce some variation in the field's inherited information or domain, its traditions. In producing these variations in the symbol system, that is AI innovation, it makes decisions and choices about these variations, that is, it has a form of agency. And the limitations on autonomous decision-making are, however, set by the field and domain, acting as both a set of constraints and enabling factors, making creative choice possible for this form of artificial intelligence. And here's another possible conclusion, which I think is getting closer to the nub of what's going on. In scraping the data of the knowledge system and rearranging aspects of it to create novel and valued cultural products, you can note that I've taken my quote and according to the prompts I've given my own quote, I've been generating new results. In a process of tradivation, artificial intelligence in the form of generative AI makes self-guided choices assisted by a human interlocutor who also has acquired a degree of songwriting domain knowledge. I think this is closer to what my research demonstrated anyway. It is the combination of AI and the human collaborator which forms a human plus AI hybrid, the creative dyad, which is not my term, it's Schreier's term, which itself acts as an agent in this process. He's written a really good little book called Basic AI, if you want to pursue that one, but that's in the references as well. So this dyad or creative partnership has the task of producing some variation in the field's inherited information or domain. In producing these variations in the symbol system, the songwriting partners, that is AI and human, make informed decisions and choices about these variations. In other words, that dyad has agency. The limitations on autonomous decision-making are, however, set by the field and domain of songwriting, acting as both a set of constraints and enabling factors, constrablers, which make creative choice possible for this partnership. Now, here's my final conclusion. As more and more people interact, particularly with generative AI, the AI and this human plus AI hybrid appears to be learning more and more about songwriting, both from scraping the data from the web and various other places, but also in terms of the interaction between the human and the AI itself. It's always learning. As David Schreier attests, it is David, in the background, masses of people are training the AI to be smarter about how it analyzes, and therefore uses this analysis to reproduce more and more accurate songwriting. But as far as I can see, we're not fully there yet. Expert systems are less about AI agency than they are about choices made by the knowledge engineer coder who put them together. But it's when we move into deep learning that things become really, really interesting as far as this question of agency goes. What happens when we actually do invent a piece of automation able to make the choices by themselves, by the way, with little prompting to create a convincing song using plausible titles, familiar structures, interesting lyrics, rhyme schemes, and catchy melodies in one adaptable and learning software application? Beatbot appears to be it, but its use of ChatGPT and its use of the human interlocutor, I think, rules it out. So we're still at the point of that AI-human hybrid that Schreier pointed out as well. So we've got to give agency to the dyad, give agency to the partnership. I think that would be my final conclusion. And I'll leave it up to you to discuss and debate these ideas. You can read about them here in order to help your discussion, and here, and here. And thank you very much.